As a new intern at my old high school, I was eager to prove myself in an environment that was both familiar and foreign. I thought the basement office, tucked away in a dark corner of the building, would be the perfect escape from the usual chaos of the school day. It was a small, dimly lit room, one that had always felt like it belonged to another time. An office forgotten by the rest of the world, where nothing could disturb me, and I could just focus on my work in peace. I thought it was going to be the ideal setting for me to dive into my tasks and ease into the new role. But little did I know that my expectations of a calm, solitary day were about to be shattered. I walked down the narrow hallway, the musty scent of old wood and worn carpet filling the air. As I passed the empty classrooms, the silence weighed heavy, too heavy for a school that usually buzzed with the sounds of students rushing from one lesson to another. The stillness unnerved me, but I quickly brushed it aside. After all, I was here to work, not to overthink every little thing. I pushed open the door to the basement office, a door that creaked in protest as if the building itself didn't want to welcome me. Inside, the small fluorescent light buzzed above, casting an unsteady glow across the room. The desk sat under the flickering light, as if waiting for me to sit down and get to work. I wasn't sure what I expected, maybe a fresh start, some quiet time to reflect. The hustle and bustle of high school life seemed so far away in this hidden corner of the building. I thought about how lucky I was to have the space to focus without distractions. But something in the back of my mind whispered that this stillness wasn't quite as peaceful as it seemed. Felt more like the calm before a storm. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the feeling. There was no need to overthink it. It was just an office, a room. Nothing more, nothing less. But then came the phone call. The shrill ring cut through the quiet like a knife. It startled me, sending a chill racing down my spine. I fumbled for my phone, my pulse quickening as I saw the caller ID. It was from the front office. My mind raced. Why were they calling me down here? I answered quickly, but the voice on the other end sent a wave of dread through me. Attention! The voice crackled through the speaker, mechanical and emotionless. The school is on lockdown. Stay inside your offices. Stay away from the windows and lock the doors. Do not leave your location under any circumstances. This is not a drill. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Lockdown. The words hung in the air, like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. My body tensed, and I could feel the familiar rush of panic creeping up my spine. Was it some kind of emergency? A fire drill? A gas leak? But no, the voice didn't sound like any of those things. The urgency in the tone, the lack of clarity, it didn't feel like a typical drill. Something was off. I stood there in the small office trying to gather my thoughts. The faint hum of the building's old pipes suddenly felt deafening. The sound of my own breath too loud in the oppressive silence. I turned off the lights, hoping that somehow the dark would offer some comfort, some sense of security. But all I could think about was the uncertainty, the fear creeping in at the edges of my mind. Was I safe here? I wasn't sure. I could hear the pounding of my heart in my ears, feel the rush of adrenaline flooding my veins. It was the kind of feeling you get when your fight or flight instinct kicks in, but you have no idea which way to run. I stood in the darkness, trying to make sense of everything. The quiet had turned from a comforting silence to something ominous, something threatening. It was no longer the peaceful solitude I had imagined. My body moved on autopilot. I crouched beneath the desk, instinctively seeking shelter, as if somehow hiding would protect me. My breath came in shallow, nervous bursts, my chest tight as I tried to calm myself. I didn't know if I was being paranoid or if something was truly wrong, but the air in the room felt thick, too thick with tension, with uncertainty. Something about the whole situation didn't feel right. The stillness had morphed into a pressure I couldn't shake. It was as though the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I stayed crouched under the desk, listening. The sound of footsteps, distant at first, grew louder. Each step echoed down the hallway outside my office door, sending a cold shiver down my spine. The footsteps didn't stop. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. Every instinct in me screamed to get up, to move, to do something. But I couldn't. Not yet. The footsteps came closer, the sound so clear and precise. They stopped just outside my office. My heartbeat quickened, and I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that whoever it was wouldn't find me. I didn't even know who it was. Was it someone from the school? Was it someone with ill intentions? I didn't know, and I couldn't afford to take the risk of being wrong. Then the door creaked open. The sound was barely audible, but it sent a wave of fear surging through me. I tried to stay as still as possible, as quiet as possible. The room seemed impossibly small now, the shadows stretching like long fingers around me. My hands were clammy, my mouth dry, and all I could think about was whether or not I was about to meet the source of whatever nightmare was unfolding outside these walls. The shadow of someone loomed in the doorway, but I couldn't make out who it was. The dim light from the hallway cast only the faintest outline of the figure, and I couldn't bring myself to look closer. My pulse thudded in my ears, drowning out all other sounds. Whoever this person was, they were too close. Too close to me, too close to the truth I was desperately trying to avoid. And as they stepped into the office, I had no idea what would happen next. Minutes felt like hours. The seconds stretched long and thin, each one dragging as though time itself had slowed in response to the fear that gripped me. My mind was a whirl of confusion, trying desperately to process everything happening around me. The world outside the basement office felt distant, as though I was trapped in a bubble where nothing made sense. Was this real? Was I imagining things? My heart thundered in my chest as I tried to make sense of the strange, unsettling stillness. But no matter how hard I tried, the same thought kept looping in my mind. Something was wrong. The faint sounds of footsteps echoed through the hallway, the rhythm of them sharp and deliberate. They grew louder and closer, each step like a hammer pounding against my senses. My breath quickened, shallow and jagged, and my hand, trembling uncontrollably, reached for my phone. I had to text someone, anyone, to let them know what was going on, to ask for help. But the words stuck in my throat. My fingers hovered over the screen, unable to form any coherent sentence. It was as though my mind and body were refusing to cooperate. I couldn't think straight, couldn't move, couldn't speak. The footsteps stopped. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I had no idea if the person knew I was here or if they were just passing by. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with anticipation. My breathing grew erratic, a quick, panicked rhythm that seemed to echo in the otherwise still air. I squeezed myself further into the corner beneath the desk, praying that whoever it was would simply leave, that they wouldn't notice me, that I could remain hidden in this dark corner and wait for the chaos to pass. But then the door creaked open. The sound was soft, almost imperceptible, but to my panicked mind, it might as well have been a thunderclap. The darkness of the room seemed to deepen in that moment, swallowing every ounce of my courage. I squeezed my eyes shut for a brief moment, trying to steady my breathing, but it was no use. My pulse raced, and every fiber of my being screamed for me to do something. Anything. A shadow filled the doorway, tall and imposing, blocking out the little light from the hallway. I couldn't see the figure's face, not yet, but I could feel the weight of their presence. Every inch of my body screamed that I wasn't alone anymore. The air was thick, heavy with tension, and I could taste the bitter tang of fear on the back of my tongue. The stranger stood there, unmoving, and for a terrifying moment, I thought they could hear my heart pounding against my ribs. I stayed still, not daring to move, my mind racing through 1,000 possible scenarios. Was it someone from the school? Someone who had entered the building during the lockdown? Or was it something far worse? Someone dangerous? A part of me wanted to jump up, run, scream, but my legs felt like they were made of stone, heavy and unyielding. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to make sense of what was happening. The stranger didn't move at first, just stood there in the doorway, their figure outlined against the weak light from the hallway. The room was so still that I could hear my own breath, the soft shuddering of it in my chest. I prayed, no, I begged, for them to leave, to move on, to go somewhere else. But instead, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps as they moved closer. Each step echoed in the small, dark room, sending waves of panic through me. My heart felt as though it might burst from my chest. I pressed myself further into the corner, my back against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. I wasn't sure what to do anymore. There was no escape. The only thing I could do was hold my breath and hope that somehow, by some miracle, this person wouldn't find me, that I would remain hidden, that I could survive whatever was happening. The man's shadow loomed closer. I could feel his presence right above me now. My heart was in my throat, and my hands, trembling uncontrollably, clutched the edge of the desk for some kind of support. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Every second felt like an eternity, and I could feel the weight of the world crashing down on me. I wanted to scream, to shout, to cry for help, but the fear was paralyzing. My mind raced through 100 different scenarios, none of them offering a solution. I prayed again, silently, hoping that somehow he would leave. But instead, I heard the unmistakable sound of him kneeling down, the soft scrape of fabric against the floor. He was coming closer. I could feel it, could hear it. My body was stiff with terror, but I couldn't bring myself to move. My body was betraying me. I had to do something. I had to escape. But all I could do was wait. The man stood there, moving around the room as if he were part of the furniture, like he belonged in this small, dark space. His movements were slow and deliberate, his hands brushing across the desk, the shelves, the walls, as though searching for something, or maybe just exploring the room. I could barely make out his silhouette in the dim light, but his presence filled the room entirely. It was a strange sensation, feeling the weight of his attention without knowing exactly where he was focusing. The silence between us grew thicker with every passing second, and I dared not make a sound. If I breathed too loudly, if I shifted even slightly, it might alert him to my presence. I could only pray he wouldn't find me, wouldn't turn in my direction, wouldn't notice the hidden figure beneath the desk. His footsteps were soft, muted, almost as if he was trying not to draw attention to himself, but the tension in the air made every movement feel amplified. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was he part of the staff? Another intern? Or was he someone entirely different? Someone dangerous? My heart pounded in my chest, my fingers still clutching my phone, praying that somehow I could find a way out of this nightmare. Then, just when I thought I might pass out from the intensity of the moment, the unexpected happened. The man stopped moving. I heard the creak of the chair as he slowly sat down across from the desk, just inches away from where I was hiding. The sound of it reverberated through the silence like a gunshot, and for a moment, I thought my heart had stopped entirely. There we were, in that small, dark room, separated by a thin desk. His breathing was slow and steady, almost too calm. It unnerved me. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his presence, hear the soft rustle of his clothes as he shifted in the chair. And for that brief, terrible moment we were both silent. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Time seemed to stop. He was too calm, too composed, and that made everything feel wrong. I couldn't trust my instincts anymore. Was he a teacher? An administrator? Someone sent to check on the lockdown? Or was he the very threat the school had warned about? I couldn't even process the thought. I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the truth. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the feeling of dread settling over me. Every muscle in my body ached, frozen in place, unwilling to make a sound. If he had a gun, I didn't want to provoke him. If he was dangerous, Any movement, any noise could be the end of it. Just as I thought the silence might consume me, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The sharp vibration startled me, sending a shock of panic through my entire body. I froze, terrified to even reach for it, but my hand moved of its own accord. I glanced at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. It was a text from a friend, someone who was in another part of the school. The shooter is in the building. He's in the basement. My world tilted on its axis. My stomach dropped to the floor as the truth hit me like a freight train. My hands shook violently as I read the message again, as if seeing it a second time might make it somehow less real. But it didn't. It was real. The man sitting across from me, calm, collected, as if this was all normal, was not a teacher. He was not a fellow intern. He was the shooter. My heart stopped, then began to race uncontrollably, each beat echoing in my ears. The sound was deafening, drowning out everything else. I had no idea how to react. My body was paralyzed with fear. I wanted to run, wanted to hide, wanted to scream, but I was trapped, physically and mentally. The walls of the basement office seemed to close in on me, each breath I took feeling heavier, like the air itself was pressing against me. My mind was a chaotic blur of panic and disbelief. How had I ended up in this situation? How was I supposed to survive? The realization that the man sitting across from me was the shooter was more than terrifying. It was crippling. I was alone in this room, completely at his mercy, and every single instinct in my body screamed for me to get out, to run, to escape. But how? I didn't know where to go. I didn't know how to escape. I was trapped, stuck in this small office with someone who wanted to harm others, and there was no one around to help me. No one to hear me if I screamed. No one to stop what was coming next. The silence between us stretched, a heavy, suffocating thing. I could feel the man's gaze, even though I couldn't see his eyes. The air was thick with tension, and every sound, every movement, felt magnified, as if the room itself was holding its breath. I had to do something, anything. But what? What could I do? The door behind him was my only possible escape. But if I moved even an inch, he would notice. My phone was still in my hand. My fingers curled around it so tightly I was afraid I might break it. The message from my friend, the knowledge that the shooter was right here in this very room, made my pulse skyrocket. But I couldn't do anything. I couldn't risk it. Time passed in a blur. Minutes stretched on like hours. My head was spinning. The noise of my own breathing was deafening. Each moment, each second, I expected him to turn toward me, to see me cowering beneath the desk, to reach for his weapon and end it all. But he didn't move. He stayed seated, as calm as ever, as if everything was perfectly normal. I couldn't think anymore. I couldn't process what was happening. All I could focus on was the desperate need to survive, to get out of this nightmare. But it felt impossible. And just like that, I knew. The real nightmare was only just beginning.